Welcome to the hidden corners where truth and terror collide. Discover a realm where the lines between the living and the supernatural blur as you embark on a journey to the paranormal and visit the mysterious hidden corners of your mind. Welcome to the Wolfman Chronicles. This is Chapter 10 of Book 7. We're on episode 87. And Clay is out of town this week, so unfortunately for you guys, I have to do the reading. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back and relax, and enjoy the story. This episode takes place in Nevada. Desert Games. Tucker's dad, old Roy Benton, leaned against the rusted frame of the service bay door, a cigarette smoldering between his fingers. The afternoon heat shimmered off the cracked concrete of the old gas station lot, all but one of the pumps now dry, but the place still served cold beer and bad advice to anyone who happened to wander in. He squinted toward the desert, the direction his boy and his gang of little hellraisers had disappeared into hours ago. "Dumbasses," he muttered, flickering ash onto the dirt. But there was a hint of pride in his voice, the kind that came from seeing your own blood take charge, lead something, even if it was something stupid. Roy had never had much. Growing up in Barstow with a drunk father and a mother who disappeared one morning without so much as a note, he'd run off to Vegas as soon as he could scrape together enough cash, thinking he'd hit it big. Blackjack, poker, roulette. But the house always won. Always. And when the money dried up, he found himself spending more time in back alleys and pawn shops than at the tables. That's when he met Trina. She'd smelled like vanilla and smoke, and she had a laugh that could make you forget how far you'd fallen. She wasn't his forever, but for a while they were both just two lost people trying to make it work. Then came Tucker. Roy still remembered holding the squirming baby in his arms, Trina already packing her bag, her eyes glassy and hollow. "He deserves better than me," she said, without an ounce of regret, and then she was gone out the door. He hadn't seen her since. Raising a boy alone was no easy feat, especially when you're barely holding it together yourself. There were arrests, mostly DUI, fines he couldn't pay, nights spent sleeping in the station's back room with a bottle and a busted fan to keep the flies away. But through it all, Tucker stuck around. Kid had grit. And when Roy scraped together enough to buy that run-down station off a cousin who was dying of cancer and owed money to all the wrong people, it felt like a fresh start. He chuckled to himself, thinking about Lu, Looney Lu, as the locals called her, always muttering about lights in the sky, writing weird letters to the editor, wandering into the station trying to trade goat's milk for gas. But she was harmless and kind of fun to mess with. Hell, he'd had his eyes on her for years now, but never had the nerve to do anything about it. Tucker had taken it to another level, of course. Him and those other punk boys. Roy didn't know the full extent of it, and maybe he didn't want to. He didn't like the idea of these out-of-towners hanging around, asking about Lou. It was one thing to mess around with a local, but get someone else involved who didn't know the ways of the desert, and things might just get ugly. He took one last drag from his cigarette and crushed it under his boot. The desert stretched out in front of him, unforgiving and wide. He didn't like how quiet it had gotten. "Come on, kid," he said to no one. "Don't let this get out of hand." He stood there for a while, watching the horizon, waiting, wondering if the ghosts of all the bad choices he'd made were finally catching up with him. The screen door banged shut behind Tucker as he stepped into the kitchen, the smell of over-fried pork chops clinging to the air like grease on denim. Roy stood at the stove in his stained tank top, flipping meat in a battered cast-iron skillet, a half-drained bottle of beer sitting on the counter next to him. "Hey, Pop," Tucker said, plopping down into the cracked vinyl chair at the table. He grabbed a slice of bread from the stack and started chewing like he hadn't eaten all day. "You boys get into anything worth bragging about?" Roy asked without turning, though his ears perked up. Tucker snorted, grinning through a mouthful of bread. "You won't believe it. We really got her this time." Roy's spatula paused mid-flip. "You didn't hurt her, did ya?" "Nah, just scared the shit out of her. We dragged her out of that trailer this morning, blindfold and all, and stashed her in that old root cellar down by the Dry Creek shaft. You should have heard her screaming about aliens and government mind control. Thought she'd piss herself." Roy slowly turned, the chops sizzling angrily behind him. He looked his boy in the eye for a long second. "You left her down there?" Tucker shrugged. "Yeah, left her a couple of sandwiches and water. She'll be fine. It's just a prank. We're going to text those weirdos she's been talking to, send 'em on a little wild goose chase, freak 'em out good." Roy grabbed the bottle off the counter and took a long swig, eyes still locked on Tucker. The boy was grinning like he'd just bagged a 10-pointer. Roy tried to feel the same kind of pride as earlier, but something wasn't sitting right now. Not anymore. Luella. Lonely, batshit Luna, for sure. But she wasn't a bad sort, and Roy, well, he could still picture the sway of her hips under those long skirts, the way her hair glinted silver in the sun, and how she used to smile at him like maybe she saw more than a broke-down gas station owner with busted dreams and a DUI record. It'd been a long time since he'd been with a woman, longer still since one had wanted him. But maybe she'd be real grateful to see a friendly face after all that. Maybe she'd cry a little, reach out for comfort, and find him waiting there, solid and warm and willing. He could offer her that. Hell, she deserved that after the stunt those boys pulled. Roy wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, his mind already moving faster than it had in weeks. "You boys clean up your mess?" he asked, voice low. Tucker blinked. "Huh? You leave any of your dumb-ass fingerprints out there? Beer cans? Shoes? Spray paint?" Tucker looked unsure now. "I mean, I don't know. Probably." Roy sighed. He reached for his keys on the hook by the door. "Eat your damn dinner. I'm going to go check on her. Make sure your little joke don't turn into a damn felony." Tucker watched his old man disappear out the door, confused. "We're just having some fun," he muttered. But Roy wasn't thinking about pranks anymore. He was thinking about Lou, alone in the dark, scared and shivering. And he was thinking about the way her voice used to go soft when she talked to him. Maybe he'd just show up like the hero. Maybe she'd let him stay a while. Lou's arms wrapped tightly around her knees, her back pressed to the cool, jagged stone wall of the mine shaft. The air was stale and damp, carrying the faint, metallic tang of old ore and something else, earthy and alive, like something breathing in the dark. Her flashlight, a weak little pen light from her keychain, had long since died, leaving her surrounded by a suffocating blackness that pulsed with every small sound. A drip of water echoed somewhere deeper in the shaft, or was it a footstep? A claw? She squeezed her eyes shut. "Stop it, Lou. Don't go there." At first, when they'd grabbed her, hoods up, faces hidden behind alien masks. She'd been sure they were aliens, the same ones that had been teasing the edge of her property for weeks now. The lights, the high-pitched whining sound that didn't come from any plane she knew. She'd told people, but no one believed her. But now she wasn't so sure. Aliens didn't pack bologna sandwiches in plastic wrap. Aliens didn't shove a plastic gallon of water at you and say, "Don't scream," in a voice that cracked like a teenage boy's. She'd eaten the sandwich they'd left for her, but the water had gone faster than she'd planned. Her throat was dry now, lips cracked, her stomach ached with hunger. She heard a rustle. Something small, maybe, scraping along the rock just a few feet away. "Don't be a rat! Don't be a rat! Don't be a—" Skitter, skitter, skitter. She slapped at the floor with her sandal, heart hammering. Her breath came in ragged little gasps, fogging the stale air. "They're just kids," she whispered to herself. "Just dumb, bored kids." But if they were kids, why were they picking on her? And more importantly, why hadn't they come back? She shifted slightly, trying to stay warm in the thin cotton sweater she'd had on when they took her. Her bones ached. Her ankles were strapped tight with duct tape, but her arms were free, and she worked and worked that tape, trying to free it. She couldn't tell how long she'd been down here anymore. Morning, night, it was all the same in the dark. Then, suddenly, there was a sound from above. Boots on gravel. She froze. A faint beam of light wavered down into the shaft. A voice, deep, casual, echoed faintly down the tunnel. "Lu? You still alive down there?" Lu's pulse quickened. Her first thought was, "They're back." But this voice sounded different, older, and Lu wasn't sure who she should be more afraid of. Jack steered the dusty rental car down the rutted dirt path that led to the location the pin coordinates on Sasha's phone had indicated. The landscape stretched endlessly, waves of low sagebrush, scattered Joshua trees, and creosote bushes, and rocky outcroppings that looked like the bones of the earth. "Well, we're here, right in the middle of nowhere," Sasha muttered, glancing at the coordinates on her phone. Rachel leaned forward from the back seat, eyes squinting against the brightness. "This place feels like the middle of nowhere." "That's because it is the middle of nowhere," Jack replied. "They're just sending us on a wild goose chase, I'm afraid." Overhead, a glint of something silver glinted in the setting rays of the sun. Another ping hit Sasha's phone. "More coordinates," she muttered, showing them to Jack. Jack didn't speak, trying hard to keep his anger from surfacing. He gripped the wheel tighter as they began to climb over a rise, dust trailing behind them like a ghost. The road narrowed into a washboard track, the suspension groaning as they bounced and lurched down another road to nowhere. The sun was already leaning toward the western horizon, turning the desert sky the color of fire, when Jack brought the car to a hard stop beside a half-collapsed windmill. "This is the third dead end," he growled, climbing out of the driver's seat and pacing away from the vehicle. Sasha stood behind the open car door, checking her phone for the umpteenth time. "Another text just came in," she said cautiously. "New coordinates, north this time, near the dry lake bed." Jack turned slowly, his jaw clenched. "No." His voice was low and final. "I'm done chasing ghosts." "Jack, what are you saying?" Sasha asked. Rachel stepped out of the car and stood beside her. "I'm saying we've been played, over and over." He looked between them, frustration sparking in his eyes. Someone's having a hell of a time stringing us along, and we're just dancing to the tune." "But we can't stop looking for Lou," Rachel started. Jack held up a hand. "We're not stopping. I'm taking you both back to Tonopah. You'll stay at the hotel, safe. This game ends tonight, but not with you two out here with me." Sasha narrowed her eyes. "What are you going to do?" Jack didn't answer immediately. He walked back toward the car, dust kicking up around his boots. When he turned, there was something cold behind his eyes. Calculation, restraint. The wolf inside the man, held back by something thin and fraying. "I've got a plan," he said, brushing past them, "but I'm not telling you what it is. Not yet." He climbed into the driver's seat, started the engine, and looked at the road ahead. Behind them, the empty desert seemed to shiver in the heat, and somewhere out there, someone was watching, still playing their game. But Jack was about to change the rules. Tucker snatched the pork chop off his plate and bolted out the door, letting it slam behind him. Roy's truck was already a cloud of dust barreling down the road, heading west toward the old Dry Creek shaft. "Shit," Tucker muttered, jogging toward the shed where his dirt bike was parked under a tattered tarp. He yanked the tarp off, slung a helmet under his arm, and kicked the engine to life. It sputtered, then roared, and he gunned it out of the yard, tires spitting gravel onto the porch. If Roy let Lou out of the shaft, this whole thing would blow wide open. The bike bucked under the dirt path behind the gas station, sagebrush whipping at his jeans as he sped off into the desert. He knew a shortcut through the hills that would get him to the old mine. Before Roy even got close, Grayson was sending the coordinates that was leading Jack and Sasha around in circles and leading them ever closer to finding Lou. Now that Tucker's dad was there, he sure didn't want the strangers showing up and confronting his dad. As he rode, the wind howled in his ears, and the sun dipped lower behind the ridgeline, casting long shadows across the Nevada landscape. It was supposed to be a joke, just some fun, a scare, nothing serious. But now Tucker felt the heavy churn of something else in his gut. This wasn't just a prank anymore. This was a race. The sun was low over the Nevada desert, casting long golden streaks over the vast nothingness between Tonopah and Goldfield. Jack's knuckles were white on the wheel of the dusty rental car as he barreled down the old highway, a thin strip of asphalt that cut across the sagebrush and rock like a scar. He'd dropped Sasha and Rachel at the Mizpah with a tight-lipped promise, "Stay put, I've got a hunch." As he reached the outskirts of Goldfield, the gas station came into view. That weathered, sun-blasted outpost hadn't changed a bit since their last pass-through, except now Roy's battered old truck was pulling out onto the dirt road that wound toward the hills. Jack hit the brakes, slowing the car behind a low rise, just in time to watch the truck kick up dust as it rumbled away. Moments later, a second shape darted from behind the station, a dirt bike, engine whining, rider hunched low over the frame. Tucker. Jack's eyes narrowed. The boy rode like he was born on two wheels, weaving through the desert scrub and rock like it was his own personal playground. There'd be no way to follow the bike without giving himself away or breaking an axle on the rough terrain. But the truck? That was another story. Roy's route wasn't subtle. The wide dirt track curled out past some abandoned buildings and into the scrubland. Jack waited a few moments, then eased into gear and followed at a distance, being careful not to be seen. There wasn't much out here, just the occasional rusted-out car, an old shack collapsing into the ground, and the skeletal remains of some long-forgotten mining equipment. In the desert, distance was both a curse and a gift. If you weren't careful, you could be spotted a mile away, but if you knew the land, knew how to blend in with the dunes and stone, you could stay hidden in plain sight, and it would be dark soon. Jack kept Roy in view, the sun's glare reflecting off the truck's rear window just enough to guide him. Every instinct in Jack's body was awake now. As Roy's truck disappeared into a break in the low hills, Jack slowed again, letting his vehicle crawl along the path like a stalking predator. The hunt was on. And after half a mile, Jack crested a small ridge, and there it was, the mine. Long since collapsed in on itself, the old wooden entrance sagged like a broken jaw. The rusted skeleton of a mining cart leaned against the side of the rock, half buried in gravel. Around it, the remains of desert mischief told a familiar story: shattered beer bottles, bullet-riddled tin cans, scorched black circles where bonfires had once roared. Jack stopped, killed the engine, and stepped out. The dry wind kicked dust around his boots. He'd walk the rest of the way, in silence. Then came a faint buzz in the air. Not a bee, not wind, a drone. Jack's head snapped up. He looked straight up into the drone's camera and smiled. Game on. Luella tried to stand, heart pounding. The duct tape that was wrapped around her legs was too tight. "Hello? Is someone there?" A flashlight beam bounced against the shaft wall. A tall figure ducked inside. The beam hit her face, and she flinched. "Well, would you look at that?" came the slow, syrupy drawl. "Looney Lu herself. Looks like you're in a bit of a predicament." Her heart dropped. "Hello, Roy." He stepped into the chamber, smirking, one hand holding a flashlight, the other resting on his belt buckle. He reeked of cigarettes, grease, beer, and old sweat. His shadow stretched long and twisted on the walls behind him. "I brought you a little dinner." He held up a crumpled napkin-wrapped pork chop. "Cold now, but better than starving, huh?" She didn't move. He took a step closer. "What is this all about?" she snapped, trying to summon what little strength she had. Roy chuckled. "Aw, come on now. You're always strutting around like some desert queen, burning your incense and talking to the sky. Figured maybe you could use a little grounding, sweetheart." He knelt and set the pork chop on the crate beside her, his hand brushing against her thigh. She flinched away, backing herself into the wall further. "It was your boy that did this, wasn't it? And I bet you told him to do it," she said, her voice hardening. Roy stood slowly. "You always did think you were better than the rest of us, all high and mighty, with your dream catchers and crystals. But you're just a woman like anyone else, lonely, scared, same as the rest." He reached for her, and her hand flew up instinctively, slapping his face hard enough to echo down the shaft. Roy stumbled back, surprised more than hurt. His eyes went dark. "All right," he muttered. "Fine. Play hard to get. Maybe a little liquor'll warm you up." But before he could say another word, a noise echoed from outside the mine, distant at first, then louder, tires crunching gravel and the high-pitched whine of dirt bikes. Roy turned toward the entrance, scowling. Damn those kids. Luella's breath caught in her throat. What now? She wondered. Roy spat on the ground and muttered a curse. He turned back to her. "We ain't done yet. I'll just go get us that bottle." Then he slipped back into the dark recesses of the tunnel, disappearing just as the heavy wooden door was pushed open. Below the ridge, the desert wind kicked up little whirlwinds of dust around the mouth of the mine shaft. Jack had parked his SUV behind a cluster of boulders and climbed up to a higher vantage point, crouched low against the rocks, with his binoculars trained on the scene below. 4 dirt bikes skidded to a stop near the gaping black maw of the mine. The riders, teenage boys in dusty jeans and hoodies, killed their engines and hopped off, shouting to one another, hyped up and oblivious to how close they were to having their little game blow up in their faces. Roy's old truck sat just off to the side, the tailgate open. Jack's jaw tightened. That's it, he thought. That's where they've got her. He scanned the scene one more time, calculating. The mine entrance was flanked by rusted supports and loose rock, and only the kids and Roy seemed to be here. He thought about ringing the local sheriff's department, but decided against it. It would take too long to get the sheriff here, and Jack didn't want to give the hoodlums time enough to run. No, Jack wanted to handle this one his way. Miles away, in a converted equipment shed packed with makeshift technical gear and computer equipment, Grayson peered at the grainy image on his monitor. The drone hovered just far enough above the mine to capture the approach, and there, clear as day, the man crouched on the ridge, looking down at the mine. Grayson's stomach dropped. He fumbled for his phone and jabbed the call button, trying Tucker first. 1 ring, 2, straight to voicemail. Come on, come on! He tried another number. Brian, then Jesse. Nothing. Dead zone. Grayson's hands trembled slightly as he watched Jack shift, moving fast now, slinking down the slope toward the mine, sticking to shadows and gullies like he was made of smoke. He's coming for them, Grayson thought, but there was nothing he could do about it. Grayson grabbed his hoodie and bolted out of the shed, leaving the door swinging in the wind. The boys had rigged up this whole game for fun. Drones, pranks, fake rituals, even the texts which would lead eventually to the location where Looney Lu was being held. But that wasn't supposed to happen yet. This wasn't fun anymore. It was slipping out of his hands. He gunned his dirt bike and tore off across the flats, a dust plume curling in his wake, praying he could get there before it was too late. The very last remnants of light cast long shadows as the sky darkened and the first stars began to appear. Jack crept closer to the entrance of the mine shaft, his boots silent against the sand and broken rock, ears tuned to every gust of wind and rattle of sagebrush. He was close now. He could feel it. The stench of cigarette smoke and sweat hung in the air like a warning. He was contemplating whether he should walk in as a man or surprise them as a wolf. He opened the heavy wooden door and peeked inside. Depending on how deep the entrance was and how close it was to where Luella and the guys were, he thought he might have a chance to make the transformation once he was inside. The old mine shaft had been converted into a root cellar, but it was still dim and humid, the air thick with dust and mold. A long, dimly lit tunnel led to a room with an open door where light and voices poured out. Jack silently crept toward the open door. Standing back where he couldn't be seen, he slowly peeked around the corner of the doorway. He could see Luella slumped against the wall, eyes wide, her blouse torn where Roy had grabbed her. 4 teenage boys stood in a tense half-circle near her, their backs facing the doorway. "Dad?" Tucker hollered into the dark shaft. There was no answer. "Dad, we gotta get out of here!" he yelled. Still no answer. "You boys are gonna pay for this," Luella hissed. "Your dad ran back there." She nodded toward the back of the mine shaft. A loud crack echoed from somewhere deep inside the mine, and a loud yell turned into a cry for help. Everyone froze. "What was that?" Jessie whispered. "Dad!" Tucker yelled as loudly as he could. The sound reverberated off the deep walls. "Shit! He's got stills back there. That's where he makes his liquor." The boy took off running, the other three following close behind. Jack stepped into the doorway, eyes glowing faintly gold. He held his finger up to his lips and whispered, "Shh." In a flash, he was kneeling beside Lu, tearing the duct tape off her ankles. He helped her stand and put an arm around her, leading her toward the door, keeping a close eye on the dark hallway leading back into the mine. A mile away, Grayson raced against the scrubland, the roar of his dirt bike rising above the wind. He leaned low over the handlebars, heart pounding. Once outside, Jack pointed up the hill to where the car was parked, hidden in the brush and rocks. "The car's up there. Do you think you can get there without me?" Luella grabbed Jack's arm, panic in her eyes. "Don't leave me," she spoke in a terrified voice. Jack nodded and kept a firm grip on Luella's arm, half guiding, half carrying her over the rocky ground. Her legs were trembling, but her mind was sharp. They had nearly reached the car when the sound hit. Boom! The shockwave of the explosion blasted dust and rock into the air, and a fiery plume erupted from the mouth of the mine behind them. The earth shuddered beneath their feet. Jack instinctively pushed Luella to the ground and threw his body over hers as bits of burning debris rained down around them. Lu covered her head, screaming, "Oh my God! What was that?" Jack looked back at the mine entrance, now belching thick black smoke. From deep inside the shaft, a second, smaller explosion cracked, then the faint, distant sound of someone yelling, "Help! Help! We're trapped!" Jack's eyes snapped toward the sound. He recognized the voice. Tucker. Behind them, the flames roared higher, and the black smoke began to crawl into the desert sky. Jack stood up slowly, helping Luella to her feet. His hands were shaking, not from fear, but from fury. He turned to her. "Get in the car. Lock the doors. If I'm not back in 15 minutes, drive straight to the sheriff." "Jack, what are you doing?" Lu's voice cracked. He didn't answer. With a final glance at the burning shaft, Jack turned and ran full speed toward the fire, toward the mine, toward whatever was still down there. Well, thank you for listening to this week's episode, and I hope you'll join us next week for another installment of the Wolfman Chronicles. And until then, have a great week, everyone.